handles the wax house with bare hands. He says that these things make him strong. The beekeeper hears them dance on the current of warm air. The beekeeper hears them dance on the current of warm air.
Thanks for doing this, Robert Frank. I'm a fan of yours. My own background is that I was kind of involved with libertarianism and tackling a lot of economic questions from that angle for years. Your approach takes a more evolutionary, naturalistic set of tools to economic questions, which I found to be a kind of healthy departure from, frankly, a very kind of politically charged and normative natural rights framework of a lot of the classical liberals. And once I got away from that kind of approach, or what they call the Austro-libertarian approach, which is something I think has muddled what could have been a value-free Austrian economics with natural rights libertarianism, a very normative political project. So anyway, I thought that your view, more empirical, more evolutionary, behavioral, was a refreshing departure from this, what I thought to be, or what I came to believe was sort of a culturally loaded approach to solving economic questions. Do you want to give me maybe a rundown on your thought on the evolution of your evolutionary economics, if you will?
Yeah, I think of the way I approach these issues as very sympathetic to the core impulse of the libertarians.
Yeah.
The libertarians basically don't like being told what to do. I call them movement libertarians in some of the things I've written. Their position is very difficult to defend. They just want to do whatever they feel like doing, no matter the consequences for other people. That's not a legitimate concern in their minds. And yet, no one would really seriously try to defend that position. I mean, if I say, I feel like driving 100 miles an hour in a school zone, the people will rightly say to me, so what? You don't have a right to do that because you would thereby put other people in great danger, and for what benefit? So, it's always a matter of trade-offs. We're all in this with objectives that overlap to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. We're competitive with one another, and when there are scarce resources, if I get it, you don't get it. That's not true of everything we care about, but it's true of a number of things. And so, did I send you a copy of the book I'm working on?
Yeah.
I think okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a memoir. There's
The
economic
title I chose
stuff mixed
was
in throughout. Yeah.
Smart for One, Dumb for All,
Yeah.
and that's just a reflection of the fact that there are lots and lots of situations where what it makes perfectly good sense for us to do individually produces a bad outcome when everybody does it. I offer the trivial example of everybody standing up to see better. Nobody sees any better than if everybody had remained comfortably seated. It would be wasteful all to stand if we could have sat, but in many venues, there's no practical way to prevent people from standing, and so that's what we get.
Yeah. You in the book, The Darwin Economy, which I kind of reached out to you originally about, you observed that your problem with libertarians is really more of a kind of dispute over where the boundaries are between my action and another's harm, or just where you would draw lines at externalities, negative externalities, right?
Yes.
So they are
Yeah,
very,
that's
very strict about it. I think they have a kind of they look at a discrete instance of some kind of transaction, and then they kind of draw the line there. Well, you're looking a little more broadly than that. People are, interacting and then interacting again, and this creates a complicated sort of wake of negative externalities.
Well, that's one distinction. I agree, but our quarrels begin even at a much simpler level than that. So, for example, many of my libertarian friends will insist that an Olympic sprinter has every right to take steroids if he so chooses. It's his body; he can put into it anything he sees fit.
Right.
And yet, the advantage you get from taking steroids is about 2/10 of a second in the 100 meters. If you take them, that means no sprinter on the planet who doesn't take them could compete with you. The winning margins are in hundredths of a second, not tenths of a second in that event typically. And so if I take them, then do I harm you, my rival? Well, you either take them yourself and suffer whatever long-term health consequences have been shown to result from taking them, or you give up the decade of training that you invested trying to compete for a medal. So does that constitute harm to you? On what reckoning could it not? I mean, would you rather be hit with a stick or have your bicycle stolen than have your investment in training for a decade thrown out the window? I think most people would say, yeah. And we don't argue about whether hitting you over the head with a 2x4 harms you. You know, you're not allowed to do that. Why should you be allowed to cause even greater harm by taking steroids?
Yeah, I think what a lot of the so-called methodological individualists do is take a kind of non-embedded or institutional approach. So, for instance, on that question right there, they don't see the broader social context of, an Olympic, a sporting event with spectators, and it's something that, culturally enriches us, and that we want certain legitimacy around that. They just see, someone who owns their body somehow transacting in a way that does not violate their kind of contract-based proviso, and the broader context of it being a sport, of it being part of this thing we want to protect in the culture is sort of overlooked, because no matter what the question is, they can zoom down due to that methodological individualism and simply reframe everything in a kind of Robinson Crusoe style, and that's just very hard to disabuse yourself of. I've noticed in that kind of
Yeah.
world.
Well, but we could be permissive. We could say, if you want to organize the steroid Olympics, have at it. You can organize an event where the rules permit runners to take steroids, and then everyone can go compete in that event who wants to, but don't say you have the right to take steroids in the event where it's not unreasonable for the rule makers to have prohibited steroids. They make every runner faster. So if everybody takes them, there's still only one winner in the race. They put everyone's health at risk. So there's a cost to it. Do the fans enjoy the race more if the margins are the same, but the absolute times go down a little bit? There's absolutely no evidence of that. It was a thrill to the world when Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. Now it's a thrill when the latest record gets broken, but there was no gain from having the absolute times go lower.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, schools of economics. What would you say yours is, and or at least what is it derived from?
Yeah, no, I'm an outlier. I'm kind of working off to the side. I don't think most economists pay much attention to me. I'd be happier if that weren't so. I think some of my policy proposals would yield enormous benefits for almost everybody and wouldn't require painful sacrifices from anybody. I regret deeply that they haven't been adopted. So I wish it weren't so, but no, I don't think I'm part of any organized school. for a long time have been associated with the school called behavioral economics. That was a field that originated here at Cornell, where I've taught my entire career. It was seen by most practitioners as the union of economics and psychology. I've argued from the beginning that those two fields usefully complement one another, but it would be better still if we added the insights from behavioral biology to the mix. And that's what I've tried to do over the decades. There are a handful of people who seem to have picked up on that idea. I'm admonished by a few younger colleagues to not be defeatist about it. And they'll say there's a lot of work going on. I hope that's right. But so far, nobody has adopted any of the tax proposals that follow from my assessment of things. And that's a pitiable waste. We could all be doing much better if we had adopted some of those proposals.
Yeah. In my cursory look at where behavioral economics belongs in the schools of thought, it seems to be a subset of institutional economics. And I don't know if you're familiar with someone like Douglas C. North.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on institutional economics and where behavioral economics and evolutionary derived economic ideas might work into that? I think, for instance, think of something like embedded markets and Karl Polanyi, and I think there's some kind of overlap there.
The behavioral economists, for the most part, think that market failure is rooted in human psychological frailty. People are weak-willed, they lack self-control, but more importantly, they make errors even when they have all the information at hand to solve relatively simple problems. And so yeah, I can see, I never thought of it the way you put it, but I can see the relationship between their policy proposals and the proposals of the institutionalists, which are that there should be non-market institutions that guide allocations in a way to correct for those kinds of shortcomings. So we make enrollment in the company pension plan the default option rather than something you have to take the trouble to investigate and decide whether it's a good idea to do it. You have to do it unless you opt out. That move has been shown to increase participation in company pension plans, but not by that much. George Lowenstein, who's thought of as a behavioral economist, has argued that you get very little mileage out of that move. You still end up with a population with grossly inadequate retirement savings if you just rely on people to voluntarily participate in pension plans to which they can gain access before they retire. So always there's a tempting expenditure where you can take money out of your IRA or Keogh account and use it to spend on a house or some other thing that is important to you. Of course, it seems important to you to spend on a house because in every country, the parents want to send their kids to the best possible schools, and in every country, the best schools are the ones in the more expensive neighborhoods. And so if you want to send your kids to a better school, the one move that's open to you is to buy a more expensive house because it will be served by a better school. But if everybody does that, if everybody draws down the retirement savings in pursuit of that goal, they end up just bidding up the prices in the houses of the better school districts. Still, half of all kids end up going to bottom half schools exactly as before. If you want to have people able to support themselves in a reasonable standard in retirement, you've got to put money aside that they can't get access to. And virtually every country does that. Proposals to do away with forced savings program, like the Bush proposal to have Social Security be voluntary, went nowhere. People don't know why they like it the way it is, but they somehow seem to grasp intuitively that if it weren't that way, they'd end up eating cat food in retirement.
Now, there's been some dispute recent years. People are saying that behavioral econ is not outside of the replication crisis, and that a lot of this nudge stuff from the late 2000s, early 2010s, that is the book I'm referring to by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, that stuff is actually it's a load of hokum. But I actually think that someone like Scott Alexander, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that
Yeah.
he's a psychiatrist, but he's kind of come up in the kind of post-blogging world and Substack world. He said a lot of that stuff actually holds up. A lot of the insights, such as having a kind of default tip suggestion, ain't using something like anchoring in people's minds, where they I don't know if that's the term anchoring, but you see three options, you tend to go for the one in the middle. It seems moderate, right? So if you design apps, such that someone wants to leave a tip, you can actually get people to behave pretty predictably in ways that do show a certain pattern of
Sure.
certain well, I don't want to get into the ethics of tipping per se, but I don't know if it's irrational to not want to tip a lot. But the point is that people can be observed to be fairly systematic like this, and we can design better institutions and protocols around that.
My claim is that those kinds of interventions produce gains that in the grand scheme of things are mere rounding errors. The real losses in the market system owe to the fact that individual and collective interests are in conflict much of the time. So it's totally natural to want to have a nice house. If you lived all by yourself on a desert island, you would want to have a nice house. You would want to have a pretty painting on the wall. But there's no way to answer the question, is my house nice? Is it a good house? Absent some suitable frame of reference. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer, fresh out of college. I went to live in a small village in Nepal. I was a math and science teacher for 2 years. There I lived in a house that had 2 rooms, no electricity or running water. Was it a nice house? For every day of the 2 years I lived in it, that was an easy question to answer. Of course it's a nice house. It was a fabulous house in that particular context. It was a much nicer house than the houses lived in by the other teachers in the school where I taught. I was always proud to entertain visitors who would come to my house. If I lived in that same house in Ithaca, New York, it would be a screaming signal that I had failed every measure of social accountability. My kids would be ashamed for their friends to see where we lived, not because they have any weakness of character, but because that's just the way we evaluate things. We need a frame of reference. It's a very simple. So what we know, there's a big literature on this. Beyond a certain point, and it's one we've passed in the developed world decades ago, further gains in many forms of private consumption don't yield any measurable increases in either health, satisfaction, longevity, anything you can measure that's associated with human flourishing, completely unaffected. When all the mansions get bigger, no effect. Maybe people are even less happy because it's a pain in the ass to manage bigger properties. If everybody spends 3 times as much on their daughter's wedding reception, which is what we do now relative to 1980 in real terms, nobody's any happier who goes to those parties. It's just the standard shifts. And so if we didn't spend beyond those thresholds and instead spent the money in a host of other ways, we'd be vastly better off. That's where the real waste is. And I estimate it's got to be at least $3 or $4 trillion a year in the US alone annually. We're throwing that much money down the toilet.
So now the implications here for debates over lifestyle, cultural values is pretty extensive because you use the examples of homes and weddings. People spend a lot, but they also enjoy crafting a wedding that they that is perfectly suited to their aesthetic preferences at the very least, and maybe deeper religious impulses and preferences. So how much is trying to mitigate this kind of seemingly needless competition really kind of tamping down on, you know, culture itself, really, and all the different ways that
It
people get attention
yeah,
and
that's
try to strive for excellence in some capacity?
yeah, that's a totally fair question, and the answer is it depends on how exactly we would attempt to mitigate that waste. If we would attempt to draft detailed rules on how to conduct wedding receptions or how to construct houses or anything along that order, that would be a gross intrusion into most people's conceptions of how they want to feel free to live their own lives and make their own decisions about such things. What I've proposed bears no resemblance at all to that. What I've advocated now for more than 4 decades is that we scrap the income tax, throw it out, and replace it with a much more steeply progressive tax on annual spending. So you'd report your income to the IRS the same as you do now. You'd document how much you had added to your savings during the year. That's your savings. Those two numbers, your income minus your savings, that's how much you spent during the year. And that amount minus a standard deduction, let's say $10,000 a person, would be your taxable consumption. And if it's a small number, you pay a very low rate or a zero rate. And as that number grows, the rate gets bigger and bigger. And so if it were $5 million a year you're spending, we could tax the next dollar you spend at 100% or maybe even 150%. All that would do would be to make your decision about how to allocate your money flow very differently. If I wanted to have a creative wedding reception, I wanted to get friends together and compose the best toast I possibly could think of, or come up with an original decorating scheme. Maybe I wouldn't even have to spend much at all on a memorable wedding reception for my kids. It might be that I want to go ahead and spend it, but then if I do spend it, it wouldn't be my aim. If I spent a lot on that event, it wouldn't be my aim to put others under greater pressure to spend more, but my spending a lot would have that effect on them, and in that sense, it would harm them. That doesn't mean you should prevent me from doing it necessarily. Just let me. It would be like taxing vehicles by weight. We shouldn't tell people you can't buy a heavy car if you want to. If you buy a heavy car, you put others at risk. And so if you have some legitimate need for a heavy car, you just want one, fine. Pay a tax on the weight of that car and compensate others by enabling them to pay a lower rate of tax on the things they buy. And that in some indirect way compensates for the harm that you've caused to them. So nobody would feel this as an intrusion on any of their options. I mean,
Because it's so non-specific. It's not like you're going after big
no,
things, you know.
no, we don't have to make any judgments about what's a luxury and what's a necessity.
Right.
That's up to you. You need a trip to Mount Everest, take it.
Now, one
We're
might
just
counter, well, okay, so even though it's non-specific, it has reduced the total amount of income that is at one's disposal to use for something that they want to pursue. But
Well, you can put it in a savings account and pay zero tax on it. And if you do that, it will compound year over year. And if you want to do the calculation, it's very easy to show that during your lifetime, you'll spend more on consumption than if you were under the tax regime that we're currently under.
Yeah.
The tax encourages saving. The capital market directs saving into the best investments on offer. And in time, as the capital stock grows, productivity grows, wages go up, income goes up. And even though we're spending a smaller fraction of our income on consumption, the total income grows by enough that the absolute amount of consumption is bigger than before. So it's
Yeah.
it's
And you know,
really it's criminally negligent not to have done this.
yeah, and also I feel like it's fairly negligible as far as any sort of diminishment of overall cultural and productive capacity in all the spice of life, in entertainment and well, weddings, and even decorating your home. I don't think it would look like some kind of gray Soviet Union if we had a steeply, graduated consumption tax because it's really because it is also relative. I mean, there's only the culture that we can see, and so if we did have a graduated, kind of consumption tax, I don't think I'd be able to say 20 years from this point, oh, look at how much culture we lost because it relies on this massive, fanciful counterfactual of so much greater spending in some kind of libertarian dream state. But yeah, I that's a little bit convoluted what I said there, but like
Yeah, the the fact is, greater investment means that some of that investment would take the form of research and development.
yeah.
Companies don't invest before they figure out what they want to produce next. They have to do research to develop the products and figure out what might be useful to people. And if anything, we're going to get a much richer array of choices as a result of doing that. One of the tasks in my recent book was to try to explain to myself how a person of, relatively speaking, modest intellectual ability could come up with proposals that would do so much good for people. Why didn't the billions of people smarter than me think about these proposals long before, and why didn't we long since implement them? I think it just became obvious to me as a result of living in a poor country for 2 years. Life seemed completely normal there, even though the standard of living, it was the poorest country on the planet. As you say, culture felt normal. People had
Yeah.
exciting social gatherings. There were competitions. There were friendships. There were events that we attended. There was no sense of diminishment of life at all, living in those vastly different material circumstances. So
Was
seeing so clearly the link between context and evaluation was what put this notion in front of me for the first time.
Yeah, it's a cliche, but man is a social animal, and you hear online as a retort to libertarian types that we live in a society, and as much as libertarians want to have a kind of thick-skinned, non-other orientedness, we're envious creatures. We are constantly evaluating others to see how we stack up. Um, I think someone like Rene Girard, actually, who's come into discussion in recent years, has talked about this, kind of a mimetic contagion, copycats. And,
Hmm.
it's really just sort of sociology 101 in many ways, but,
Right.
or cultural anthropology, let's say. Um, but I want to go back a moment. I saw a discussion of yours online. I believe you were speaking in Europe about 8 months ago. It's about a 2-hour video. And you touch on mid 20th century economic thinking in the form of John Kenneth Galbraith, the economist. And you said that he had kind of reevaluated the notion of capitalism as business is totally at the mercy of consumers, having to constantly and relentlessly figure out what they want in this kind of vicious, well, perfectly competitive system. But in fact, corporations according to Galbraith, decide what it is that consumers want, in fact, and that within a certain range of options, they don't tell them you get this one thing in some kind of top-down
Right.
stop type of nightmare, but they figure out what it is they can make, and they offer consumers, they dangle in front of consumers a limited number of possibilities. I've started to believe that is very much the case in seeing the direction of, let's say, cognitive capitalism, being this situation where, so much of the Fortune 500 is made up of a handful of huge tech companies for whom the information asymmetry between what they know about us and what we know about what they're doing is just astronomical. So the idea of corporations as taste makers, not taste takers, what do you think about that? How much power do they have there?
Galbraith was a descendant of Marx in a way. Marx thought the failure of the market system was rooted in the fact that there were concentrations of economic power.
Thank you for listening to part one of this interview, and stay tuned for part two in the upcoming days.